Alright, I am going live. I'm now on JS2, starting Twitch stream. Alright, so where did I leave off yesterday? Finished reviewing the lesson. So now in the challenges, I'm on problem 4. Looks like all the previous problems got approved. So I'm going to continue. Closure iterator, so problem 4. Alright, now I'm in sync with master. JS2 test. Right, problem 4 is set up. Now, first things first, to run the describe to start a test suite. And then this function is going to be called iterator. So I'm about to write my first test case. Let's see how this works. So it takes in an input function and it actually returns a function. So whenever the return function is called, it runs the input function and it returns what the input function returns. So this problem doesn't go into what happens if it's an empty array. So usually during an interview you would clarify like what happens. In this scenario, I think what makes sense to me is that if an empty array is passed in, the input function is just never called. So first test case is input function should if array is empty. And my second test would be input function is called. And then the last one is, so if I make sure my input function is always being called with the right arguments, and then I want to make sure the return function always returns the right value, I think we can be almost 100% sure this function is going to work. That's all the tests I need. So, and function should return. So my linter is complaining that my tests and describe is not defined, and these functions are provided when I run jest. So whenever I run jest gives me these functions like describe, test, and expect. Just like how when you run your file with Node, you get set timeout, like functions like set timeout that use. So cons. So to prevent my editor from complaining, I write global ignore the describe, test, expect, and test. Okay, no. Cool. So function should never be called if array is empty. So cons result function is I run the iterator with the array. And since I need a function to check if it's being called or not, I need to create a mock. So I create a mock function using just.fn. So if I run sf function like 5 times, we expect function dot have time 0. We expect it to be called 0 times. So now, if I have an iterator, hello 5, 9, we need to make sure that it's being called with the correct arguments. So if I run it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, yeah, so if you look here, this function is being called with 5, and then 2, and 1, and then 3, and then it loops back to 5. So we expect the first function the first argument to equal hello. And then we expect the second time it gets called to be equal to 5. And the third time it's called to be equal to 2. It's being called again. It's 4 times. How many times did I run? 5. Now when it's being called again, it's cool. So then return function should return the correct values. So let's say I pass in a function that always returns code. Then that result equals that. So the first time it gets run, I would expect result dot to. And if I result equal, I would always expect it to return. So I run that function and I run this function all in code. So now that I have come up with 3 examples that I feel like covers this function correctly, so I think I can start writing it. And if anybody have any questions, just stop me and let me know, or just write your questions in the chat and I'll get to it. So iterator is a function that takes in an array function, returns a function. Alright, so the next step is talking about how I would write out this function. So basically I need a variable I, right? And I need a variable I, and I need to define the variable in here before I return the function. If I put the variable declaration inside the return function, then I is always going to be reset to 0, so it can't just to be before we return. So we start I over there, and then we run the function with I, get the result, increment I, and then after we increment it, if I is equal to array.length, we set that to 0, and then we return the result of running the input function. I think that will work. And then we also want to have a case where if array is empty, we just always return and don't do anything. So let I equal 0 if length is falsy, just don't do anything. Otherwise, result is run the function I and I if I is equal. If if I'm at the last value, or not the last value, if I'm over the index, that means I need to reset to 0. Result. Now to make sure my function works, I run the test. Oh no. So one of my tests failed, where it says input function is called with the correct arguments. I made a mistake because instead of passing in the element in the array, I'm passing in the index. So I need to fix that. My code is wrong. So I should really be array index I. Now when I run the test, everything worked. So add the file. This commit solves problem JS2. Submit it to problem 4. Okay. Now going into the next problem, P5. First, I need to make sure P5 is in sync with master, so git merge master. Cool. I'm ready for problem 5. Create JS2 folder, 5.text.js. Okay. So right now, this problem is waiting to be reviewed. The submission looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to move on to delayed function calls. Okay. So write a function called solution. Okay, so this solution takes in an array of functions. And then after 300 milliseconds, all of them would be run. Okay, let's write some tests. So we're going to call this function delayed calls. Describe. So describe takes in a function, and then here's a test that I'm going to write. So when this test runs, my first test case is going to be should not call function if array is empty. And the second test case would be call functions at the time. Let's see if I can come up with any other example. So I'm gonna make up 3 functions, and then after 300 milliseconds, I'm gonna make sure all 3 functions called one time. And I feel like that's all the tests I need. I don't really need other tests. So in this case, 2 tests is enough. Like I mentioned before, to prevent my editor from giving me a bunch of errors, ignore these. So should not call function if array is empty. So if array is empty, then the function never gets executed. Do I even need that test? If array is empty, it's executed. No, I don't think I even need this test. Yeah, so I think I only need 1 test. So for this, I'm gonna create 3 functions. So to do that, I use jest. So function 1 equals jest.function. It calls of an array fn1, fn2, fn3, 300 milliseconds. let's say 800. Cool. So right after I call it, I need to advance the time. So I don't want my test to actually take 800 milliseconds to run. So like what I did in the JS1, I need a timer. So just set timeout mock. Let's look for how I can set the time to use fake time here. Okay, and then after I need to advance the time. So after I called delay calls, I'm gonna advance the time by 400, and a little bit of time has passed, but I need to make sure that none of these functions are called. So let's make it to 750. 750. At this time, when it's close to the 800 mark, nothing should have been called. So expect fn1 have 0. So I expect none of these functions to have been called. And then I'm going to advance the timer by 150. So this would put us after the 800 mark. And then now we expect all of them to have been called one time. And then I'm gonna advance another 900 milliseconds just to be safe, and they should have been called, still only be called one time. So this way, let's go through the test again. I'm gonna use fake timers because I don't want my test to run for such a long time. So after I call the delete calls, my timer is set to 800. So at 750, they're called 0 times. At 1,000 milliseconds later, they all should have been called 1 times. And then if I wait another 900 milliseconds, nothing should have changed. And the question is, how accurate is this? Could you do advanced time by 799? So JavaScript some functions take more than 1 milliseconds to run. So for that reason, I usually leave some space, but I think 799 should work. I don't think why it shouldn't. But I'm gonna do 790 for now to make sure there's nothing wrong with my code. Then I'll come back and change the time to 799. So I feel pretty good about this. Let me try to solve it. This takes in an array of functions and then export. So now that I have everything all set up, let's talk about how I'm going to do it. I need a variable I to keep track of where I am in the array, and then I'm going to go through for every element in the array. I'm going to set a timer for that time. And once the timer is done, I'm going to execute the function. That's it. Right? So I know I'm at the end when I hits array.length. So I'm just going to start there. If I is equal to .length, get done. So and then otherwise I set timeout. So array at index I should be the element in the array is a function already, so I'm passing in function directly into set timeout, and then wait for that number of time and delete call. This one. Feel pretty good about this solution. Let's see if it works. Run my test, just JS2. Awesome, it passed. So let's see how accurate the timer is by going back to the test and do 799. Right. So my hypothesis is that the computer is fast enough to run, so it wouldn't make a difference. But sometimes on really slow computers, it might take more than 1 milliseconds to run this, and then by the time this runs, sometime like 5 milliseconds would already have been passed. So like this wouldn't be too accurate. But let's see. So this all passed. Yeah, seemed to work. Let's do 800 and see what happens. Oop, doesn't work. So 800 doesn't work. To be safe, I usually do 790. Thanks for the suggestion. Five. Okay, so submitted my solution. Now, while waiting for this to review, I'm gonna go on to problem 6. Problem 6 is different. Okay, so it makes sense. The input is very similar to the previous one, but instead of them all getting called together, this will actually take longer. So it would wait 300 milliseconds first and then run this function, and then wait again, and then run that function, and then wait again, and then run that function. So, okay, so since it's very similar, I'm just going to be copying the file over. So copy 5.test 6 5.js 6.js. Then check out problem 6, master to be in sync. Cool. So just like the previous problem, I don't think it's just the sequence we have to test, so I don't think we need any more than one test. And then in this case, we delay it by 790, and none of them should have been called. And then we delay it by 20, so that would put us at 810, and then only the first function should have been called. And then when we delay it by 700, then still only the first function is called. And then afterwards, when we delay it by 100, two functions would have been called. And then when we delay it by 600, still two functions should have been called. And then afterwards, when we delay it by another 200, all three would have been called. So that makes sense. Let's double check our test to make sure we understand the problem. Since my timer is 800, I'm gonna do 790, so pretty close to when the timeout gets triggered. But the time is not reached yet, so nothing is called. And then I put in 20 to just go over 800. One of them should be called, right? So then I go up to 700, I wait 700 again. So just right before the second function is called, I want to make sure only one. It's not called yet. And then I increase it by 800. This time 2 should be called. And then I advance by 600. Still only 2 should be called. Advance it by 200. And all of them should have been called at this time. So let's write out the function. Okay, so this is very similar to the previous function. I might actually rename this to sequential calls. this makes more sense to me. Sequential. Okay, so let's talk about how I would solve this. So I would go through every element in the array. So what I would do is when I'm at the end of the array, or if the array is like empty, I would stop. I am done. I don't want to continue. So that's my base case. And then if I haven't stopped yet, I would set a timeout with the time. And then once the timeout is done, I would execute the function and then run the next iteration. Okay. So if I is equal to length, stop everything, and then run a set timeout. And this time I need to do more than just the default one, so my own custom function. And then once the send timeout is done, I'm going to run the function and then run sequential calls. So I'm gonna run the next iteration after my set timeout is done. And then once this executes, it's gonna run set timeout again, wait, and then once the set timeout is done, then it runs the next call. And then it runs a set timeout, and waits. And when the set timeout is done, it will run the next one. So that's the difference here. I feel pretty good about this. I added a return here just because I personally like to always return at the end of my functions. But you can also do this and it'll, it looks just as clean. So a lot of the time coding is up to personal preferences. It doesn't matter in this case. So it passed. That's good news. Solves 6 of JS2. 6. This one is done. Now, the next problem, I'm just implementing the for each again. Okay, but we don't want to override the main for each function, so haha. Cool, and I want to make sure that it's being called with 3 arguments. That makes sense. Cool. So git check it. Problem 7. Here my problem 7 is in sync with the master. JS2 folder. 7.test. Problem 7.js. So let's start with gonna require. So in this problem, there is no custom function that we're writing. We're actually adding a function into all the existing arrays in the system. So because of that, we're not really returning anything. Because we're not returning anything, our require, we just require the file. That's it. So 7.js, I think, or just 7. That's all we need to do. Describe C4. So the test case, the first test case should be mix call input function. Input function really has a term called callback. Whenever you hear the word callback, it's really the input function. So functional callback should be called with, just gonna call it callback. We call it with correct arguments. So that's the first test case I want to do. And then maybe another test case is callback should not be called if array is empty. And then C for each should return C for each doesn't return anything, so it doesn't matter what it returns, so just don't really care about that. And then I think we only have to make sure that it's called with the correct argument, and that's it. So these 2 tests covers all the cases. We don't really need 3 test cases here. And then to get rid of these this warnings in my editor, I add a comment. So now comment should not be called. So array dot c for each. So I want to make sure that a function is not called. So I need to make up a new function. And to do that, I need to create a mock using jest. And jest.function creates a new function that for me to track how many times it's been called. Cool. So expect function dot to have been times, expect it to 0 times. So maybe I could write another test to make things simpler. Callback should be called with the correct number of times. So I have I have 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 2, 1. I have 9 inputs. It should be called 9 times. And then now I have, let's make this easier. Hello. Code heart. Now this, I expect a function. So expect function.mock. So I expect the first time it's called, the first argument is going to be hello. And I expect second argument to be called the index 0. And then the third argument is the array itself. Okay, so I expect it to, so that's the first time it's called. And then the second time it's called, I expect the 0 to be a 1 at the first index. This should be please. Then the third time it's called, it should be code. Then the index should be 2 now. And then now the last time it's called, this should be hard. Okay, so all of my test cases looks good. So I'm going to start solving the problem. And since I am adding a for each into all of the arrays, I need to add it to the prototype. So array dot prototype dot c for each equals. And instead of arrow functions, I need to write function like this because I need to access this, which is like for my function to get the array that came before this dot. For me to get this array inside my function, I need to use this. So since I need to use this, I need to write functions like this. So this is the shape of my function. Let's talk about how to solve it, right? So I definitely need an index, a variable I. So if I matches like this dot length, I don't do anything, so I return, right? If it doesn't, I need to call the input function with 3 arguments. The element, the I, and the array itself. And then I just call the for each again on the array. So that's it. I is equal to stop length. Return. If it didn't return, I call the input function and I pass in the element, the I, and then the array itself. Then continue calling next with first I. See if the test runs. Oh no, failed. Let's see what went. Oh, unexpected token. This is a really tricky one. In my experience, I've wasted hours and hours with this problem, so I can't believe I fell for it again. So you're gonna hear a lot of people say don't use semicolon, don't use semicolon, but in this case, semicolon is actually crucial. So if you don't have semicolon, what the computer is doing is it's combining these two lines. So then it's trying to access the function at index hello please code hard, which is really weird, right? So like, yeah, so for example, like the computer's looking at it like this, right? So it's like computer expects function to return an object and it access the object at index hello, which is not what we want. We actually want these to be two separate lines. So for that reason, we need to semicolon. Very tricky. Now we run the test, everything works. Okay, so I submitted problem 7 and now waiting while I wait for someone to review my code. I'm gonna do problem 8. Problem 8 is a map. Yeah, and map is very similar to result. So I'm just gonna copy the files over. So what I'll do is copy 7.test to test. Copy 7.js. Let's git checkout. Problem 8, make sure sync with master. So Colton said someone is copying my code and submitting challenges right now. I think good for them. Hopefully they are learning. They are learning from this. It's good practice, so why not? Good for you. Now let's move on to problem 8. Okay, so problem 8 is CMap. So I need to run C. Need to. So here's something cool you can do with Vim. Search and replace. So I think find all C for each and replace it with CMap. Is it CMap? CMap. Right, so everything got replaced. Cool. Callback should be called with correct arguments. This test stays exactly the same. Then, so the first test stays exactly the same. Callback should be called the correct number of times. So this is correct too. Not be called if array is empty. What makes map different from what makes map different from for each is that map returns a new array. So CMap should return the correct array. So if my mock function, whenever my function is called, if I return hello or hello, and I have like 9, 8, 7, and I have 3 elements in the array, the resulting one should be hello. Yeah, so if you have a map, oh, const result equals. So when you have result equals array.cmap, your result is to equal. So your result would need to equal whatever the function returns. Cool. So that's the difference between map and for each is very similar. Just to recap, map and for each are very similar. That's why we kept most of the tests the same. But the only difference is that map returns an array. So map cares about what the input function returns, and whatever the input function returns for each element in the array would be the result array. So um, there's a special case here. Okay, cool. So now let's look at 8.js. This is CMap now. Okay, cool. So let's talk about how to do this problem. So we need an I to keep iterating, but we also need a result because for CMap, it's important that we return a map result, right? So because of that, I think we need a variable called result. And then what happens is if I matches the array length of the array, that means we are done with all the elements in the array. So we return the result of what we have gotten so far. That makes sense to me. And then otherwise, what we want to do is we want to run the callback function, and whatever the callback returns, we push it into the result, and we continue. Let's do that. If I is equal to this dot length, result is an empty array. Result and result dot push. We want to push the result from running callback. Run callback with first element, the index, and the array itself, and return this dot cmap. Let's see if this function works, and it does. So solves. I forgot which problem we're on. 8. 8. 2. JS2 problem 8. Okay, cool. Now let's look at. Now while we wait for this to be reviewed, let's look at the next one. This is the reduce. Okay. So the way reduce works is that whatever your function returns gets passed into the next call. And then there are a lot of confusion over what happens if you don't pass in. So reduce takes in 2 arguments. One is function and one is the initial value. And there's a lot of confusion over what happens if you don't pass in the second argument. Well, the thing is, when you work as a software engineer, nobody would accept your code if you don't pass in the second argument because it's confusing what happens. Um, and because we never use reduce without passing in this argument, the second argument, I don't really know what reduce does if I don't pass in the second argument. So I think for this problem, I think that's the reason why. It says I can assume that reduce will always be called with two arguments. So that makes this problem easier, or else I have to do research, which I don't really want to do because you're never supposed to use reduce without passing in the second argument. So let's ignore that. And since reduce is very similar to map, and we care about the return value, I'm just going to copy the files over. Test JS2 and git JS9, and make sure I'm in sync with master. So I'm gonna replace CMap C use. Cool. So now let's talk about what the difference is between reduce and map. So the callback should be called with correct arguments. So C_reduce, first of all, takes in two arguments. Let's say we start this with June. So the first argument is actually okay. The first argument is actually going to be June, and then it's the first element and the first index, and then so let's make this mark return value to be 10. So after this first function is called, when it's called for the second time, it's being called with the accumulator first, which is going to be 10. And then please hello. And the next time it's called, it's the same thing, because the function always returns 10. This is gonna be so it works like that, and then callback should be called with the correct number of times. It's being called 9 times, that's right. So C_reduce needs to be called with two arguments, and then for this, for the last okay. So callback should not be called if the array is empty. I don't know if that's true or not. I think it's true. So it should return hello, I believe. Let's look at, I'm not sure, so let's test it out to see what reduce does. So empty array dot reduce, pass in a random function, hello. Yeah, it just returns the initial value. Let's make sure our function does the same thing. So callback not be called if array is empty and returns initial value. So if I call this with fetch_u to you, then expect result to equal. So the function shouldn't have been called, and it should be Pikachu. So we have, and then C_reduce should return the correct result. So if it always is hero, the final result is going to. Okay, so I think all these tests is pretty comprehensive, and Someone asked if I'm going to go all the way up to JS8, and the answer is no. My intention is go all the way up to JS6 and finish JS6. Cool. So let's go to JS. Solve it. So C-reduce, the function ship takes in a callback and also an initial value. Now that the function is set up, let's talk about how I plan to solve this function. Basically, I need an element counter, to keep track of where I am in the array. And if I matches this dot length when I'm at the end, I just return the initial value. Otherwise, I run the callback function with the initial value, the element, and the index in the array. And then the result of that would be the initial value of the next function call. I just keep calling it that way. So that seems to work. I equal to 0 if I is equal to stop length. Return initial value. Otherwise, initial value would call back of whatever the initial value was, the element I, this dot c. Next one, the next value. Let's see if this works. Passed. Solves problem 9, JS2. Submit JS2 9. Nice. 2 more problems to go. Okay, the next one is a C filter. C filter is very similar to map. It's not close to reduce. So maybe I want to go from problem 8, copy the files, and then filter. So C filter is very similar to map in the sense that it takes in a callback, it returns an array, right? But map, if you have an array of 3 elements, map would return an array of 3 elements. But filter only returns, a smaller. It can return an array with a smaller size, depending on what matches the filter function. So yeah, so I'm just going to copy over CMap function to solve this problem 10. So I go to problem 8, then I copy 8.test to 10.test, 8.js to JS. If I have more time, I think I think it might be helpful to practice rewriting the test, but I've done it so long, I'm just kind of lazy at this point. But if like, I think if I wasn't so confident with how to write tests, I would use this as an opportunity to rewrite the tests. But yeah, I'm just too lazy right now. So git check out problem 10, and then make sure I'm in sync with master, which I am. Well, I am now. So start 10. So for problem 10, I'm going to replace CMap with CFilter. CFilter. Instead of requiring problem 8, I'm requiring problem 10. Callback should be called with the correct number of arguments. This one is the same, so the callback is being called the same way. That's right. Expect it to be called the same correct number of times. That's also right. And then callback should not be called if array is empty. That is right. But since it has a return value, it should also return empty array. So expect result to equal an empty array. So now CFilter should return the correct array. So now instead of mocking it, I'm actually going to write a function, and I'll just copy what they have here. So result equals CFilter EI array. I don't want the console.log. So emod2 equals to 2. That means if the element divided by 2 has a remainder of 0, then it will be true. It means your ending result is going to be 8 and 6. Just to double check, just that. Cool. So I feel like I have written all of the tests to make sure that I know CFilter, and at this point, because of all the tests I came up with, I know this function really well now. I'm ready to write the function. So I have the function shape here. Now I'm going to talk about how I plan to solve it. So I need a variable I to keep track of where I am in the array. But I also need another variable called result. Right? So if the callback returns true, I'm going to push the element into the result. And then I continue. And then if I've gone through all of the array, meaning I hits the array.length, then I return the result. Return result. Cool. And then if the callback returns a truthy value, so callback takes in the element, the index, and the array itself. If this is truthy, then I'm going to push the element into the array. And this dot CFilter back +1 result. Well, I think this would work. Let's see. Okay, it does work. So get 2 12 10 2. Nice. One more problem and done. JS2. The last problem, well, that was quick. So fast. It's already approved. Let's see who's so on top of it. Let's see. Wins. Okay. So cfind is very similar to cfilter, but instead of returning an array, it just returns one element. Let's see. So since it's very similar to cfilter, I'm going to copy over. So it returns an element. So if nothing matches, it returns null. I'm going to copy over that file. Copy 10.test. 10. Make sure in sync with master. Okay. So make sure the callback is called with the correct arguments. That's right. But for that, I need to change C filter to C find. So callback should be called with correct arguments. The test stays the same. Callback should be called the correct number of times. This one is wrong. So callback should be called 5 times if callback if the 5th element is run, returns. So instead of running just that function, and then I want to mock implementation of this function. So this function takes in an element, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if it equals 5, then it would stop. So return equal 5. So when the first time the function is called, it would be 9. 9 doesn't equal 5, and then 8 doesn't equal 5, 7 doesn't equal 5, 6 doesn't equal 5. 5 equals 5. And since this returns true, it stops here, and it would have returned 5. So const result was that. Then expect function to have only been called 5 times. I also want result 5, because 5 is the... I think 5 is too confusing. Let's do hello here. Then this element is hello. Should go to hello, which is the element in the array. Makes more sense. Okay, callback should not be called if the array is empty, and return null. Does it return null? Let's see. Let's test the default find function. So find by default returns undefined. So expect it to be called 0 times and result to equal. And cfind should return the correct element. That's covered in this test right here. Expect result to equal. Cfind should return undefined if elements callback never returns true. So returns result should be undefined. Cool. So I'm done with my test. I'm going to write the function. See. Okay. So now that I have my function shape, I need to think about how to solve it. So I definitely need an I, right? I to go through every element in the array. The first thing I want to check is if I hits the end of the array, so if I equals to this dot length, I want to return undefined, meaning I haven't found anything. And then I'll run the callback with the element I and the array. And if that returns a truly value, I would return the element and stop. Otherwise, I continue. Sounds good. If I is equal to this dot length, I'm going to return. By default, it always return undefined. So if you just put return itself, it will also work. But we can try that later. If callback, begin this at index I. I. If this is truthy, then we have found the element. So we return this at index I, and we continue. So I forgot to find that I need. So now run the test, and it works. So JS2 solves 11 of JS2. Submit. Let's see. Oh, that was weird. Arrays C5. Okay. So while waiting for this, I think I am ready for the next lesson. I would go back to curriculum. Then I would click on objects. And now while I'm waiting for it, I can start, looking at objects. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in the HTML section. So let's go here. These I just did it in my head really quickly. And browser functions. Local storage is cool. You can store data on the browser like a database. So create a to-do list, create a storybook, a site video book, and H notebook. I think this would be a really cool thing to build. But what is the storybook? Let's see. Oh wow. So if I click next, oh, so it just, these are the data in the array and I can delete them. That's interesting. If I refresh the page, it's gone. Wow. This is super cool. Is this working? So now if I refresh the page, or if I go here again, wow, it still shows up. Cool. I used to think the brain is the most important organ. Then I thought, look what's telling me that. Haha, it's funny. Next. What is Bruce Lee's favorite drink? Wata. So it just goes through them. Okay, we could build this one. I think this one would be a cool exercise to build. So let's set this up. So I need a container element to display all these elements in here, and then I need two buttons. This is a HR tag, HR input. So I need three buttons on the page, an input box, and then an element to display it. That's simple enough. So git branch. So I have a folder, I have a branch called fun. You check out fun, and if I look here, I have in JS1 I did a stopwatch.html. It's really, that's really in JS2. So I'll move it. Git and everything. Rename. Okay, so that's a little bit of cleaning up. Now I'm going to do a JS3 story book HTML. So now I'm gonna have just an h1 element. It says hello world. And if you guys want to see, it's on speed run.code.com/JS3 storybook.html. Nice. It's live. And then since I don't need this for now, I can use that. It's easier. The first thing I do, if I was told to build this, I would just roughly set up what I need to do first, so I don't have to think about it. So imagine this being step 2. So step 1 is playing around with this and really understanding what this app is doing. And then step 2 is just writing down all of the elements that exist in the page so you don't have to think about it. And then, so that's what I'm gonna do. Let me zoom into this. I need a section for the 2 buttons. So previous button with a class called previous. Next button, and then an HR tag to divide them. Then I have a story, so div story. Let's make this pretty, so h tag story goes here. And then another HR tag, I think. Cool. Now in here there's an input box and a submit button, so text area writing section. So my text editor pre-filled a bunch of this for me, so rows 30, let's make it 50. Instead of 10, let's make it 20, so I have plenty of space to write. And then submit button to HR. And this place is the all stories. Then write some JavaScript. Sure. If I go to this page, it says hello world. That's good. Story goes here. That's cool. Next, previous. Instead of hello world, let's go story. Cool, so now I have everything set up. Step 3 would be talking about how I plan to build this app, right? So obviously we need an array. And since if you look here, when you refresh the page, there's always data. And then when I add more data in here, even when I refresh the page, data exists. So because when I refresh the page, the data is always here, obviously in my code, I can't be const lines equals empty array. I can't do that because lines will now always be an empty array. So obviously I need to store the data somewhere, and to store data somewhere, I use local storage, and local storage always uses strings. So then I will get the data from local storage, and then the first part I need to do is just to display it, display the data. So let's do that. Let's first get the elements, cons. I need a previous button. I need a next button. Store section. Submit all stories. Cool. So I also need data. So where is data coming from? Storage. Let's call it story. But sometimes local storage, the first time I load the page, let me show you guys. The first time I load my website, it's going to be null. So there's nothing in local storage, so it's null. So when it's null, I want to initialize it with a string array. Let's be fun and add something fun here. So world. So now when we log, we got a string that says hello world, right? And let's add a few more. I hope. I have array. This is a string. So notice how I intentionally make this alternative a string. And I do that because get item will always give you a string back. So const lines equals json.parse. I pass the string into this parse function to get the lines, to get the actual array. So now, after parsing it, I get my array. So now when the page loads and I have my array, I should fill up like line by line into the div element. So to do that, what I do is I go through all of the lines and I use a reduce to create H2 a bunch of H3 strings, and then I set all stories.inner HTML. So all stories.inner HTML equals lines.reduce. So reduce takes in the accumulator, the element. That's all I need. And then it takes in a second argument, which I'm going to start with an empty string. So I'm going to return whatever the accumulator was, and then I'm adding a new string here, the variable h3 element. And inside the h3, I put in the line. Cool, so whatever is in local storage shows up here. Cool. I didn't mention this earlier, but usually if you're asked to build something during an interview, it's very important to be able to break down a big problem like this into little parts and then solve them part by part. So right now, I'm solving the data part to get from local storage and displaying it here. So that part is done. And then now when I add new content here and I click submit, it should get added into the array and then redrawing it. So maybe this redraw, like this render function, I should put in a helper function. Let's do that. Const set story. So this is a helper function that does that. Then whenever the app loads, I do set story. I run. So everything still works as is. So what this would do is when I hit submit, I'm gonna push whatever data is in here into the array, and then I'll call render lines. So whenever I click on submit, on click, this function would run. When this function runs, I'm going to get the value from the writing section, the writing element. Now I have the value, I push it into the lines array, and then I call set storylines function again. So now if I have an element, I click submit, whoa. So whatever is in here goes times, there's a bunch of it now. Cool. So my submit button works. The problem now is that if I refresh the page, all of the data that I added goes away. So what I need to do is after I add into the array, I gotta save the array back into local storage. So whenever I push, I need to do local storage dot set item. So I need to set item with the same thing I'm using to get item. So set item story. What data do I want to store? Lines. Unfortunately, I can't store the array directly. It's not gonna work right. I have to store a string. So convert an array to string. I use JSON.stringify. And once I pass it into JSON.stringify, it would turn the array into a string. And then that's what gets stored in local storage. So let's see if this works. I'm gonna add something, submit, then refresh the page. Hey, it's still there. So now all this data is saved. All this data is saved. Cool. So everything is here now. I can, every time I refresh the page, it's here. So now, when I click on something, it should delete this element. So I need to remove that from the array. So what I need to do is, after the lines show up on the page, I could do document.query selector all. So this all is important because it gives you an array of elements. So if we give it a class like this, equals line, then I can select all of the line, and then go through for each element. I'm going to add an onClick event. So whenever I click on the line, this function would execute. It also helps to figure out which element I clicked. So clicked on element I. Cool. So just to repeat, I'm going to get all of the lines, and for each line element, I'm going to add a onClick property to it. And then that is a function. So whenever I click on it, it should console.log clicked on element. So if I click on this one, it should say click on element 0. Okay. If I click on that one, it should say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Say clicked on element 7. Yes, works. So now I need to delete this from the array, right? So to delete it from the array, it would be lines.splice at index I. I want to delete out one of them. And since the data changed, we need to redraw. It's so important to call set storylines again. So it goes through the lines and it creates, and it redraws the page because now the array is different. So set story function. So now if I delete this, it's gone. If I delete that, it's gone. If I delete this one, it's gone. Yay. Function works. Cool. But if I refresh the page, it all comes back. So the answer here is we need to update local storage again. And do that, we just, after the lines change, we just update local storage like that. So now if we delete this, all this unnecessary one, the page, it's here. Okay, cool. So now the story goes here. So when the page first load, it should render the first, oh no, low one. I deleted all my data. So when the page loads, it should show the first line in here in the main display. And then when I click on next or previous, it should go next one or the previous one or the next one or the previous one. So since this is an array, we need another variable called index that starts at 0 and it just keeps going. When you click next, index goes to 1, goes to 2, goes to 3, etc. So to do that, I create the index is equal to 0. And then every time set storylines is called, the story text is going to lines index, the current index. So refresh. Oops, I should put index all the way up here. So see, when the page loads, index is here. And then now when I delete this, the index is the next one. So that worked out pretty well. Now I just have to do previous and next, right? So previous to on click equals a function. So if index. So basically when I click previous, I'm worried that it can't go below 0. So if I is equal to 0 or if index is equal to 0, don't do anything. Otherwise index equals -1. And then I want to set the text correctly. And then the next is essentially the same thing. But if index is equal to lines.length -1, that would be the last element. Don't do anything. Otherwise, I increase element and set the index. So now, if I do next, yes, works. If I added everything, it's working now. It's working too. Yep, so everything works. We are done with this exercise. Hope that gives you guys an idea of how to build. So sometimes during interviews, they'll give you a UI and just ask you, hey, build this, and then just go quiet. And then you kind of have to walk the interviewer through step by step. Okay, I'm going to focus on making this part work. And then actually, before all of that, what I did is I spent a lot of time experimenting what each button does and observing it. And then what happens if I click on stuff. And then what happens when I add. And what happens when I refresh the page. Like, first thing I do is understand the app. And then the second thing I do is just write down all of the elements I need. So the button, this tag, the HR tag, the text area submit, this. You can also right click, inspect element, and it would tell you, if you don't know what this guy is, just right click and inspect element and it'll show you what the element is. So you could always do that to help yourself. Like, interviewers like to know that if you're stuck somewhere, you know how to right click, inspect element, and figure these things out yourself. So after you fully understand the app, step 2 would be to write down all of these elements you need on the page. And then step 3 is to talk about, oh, I'm just going to work on this first, this section. Talk about how you would build it and then build it. And then talk about how you would build the add feature and then build it. And then talk about how you would do this and then build it. And then talk about how you would do previous and next. Well, then you're done. Cool. So done. I'm going to add finish exercise story 3. Cool. Now going back, don't do this anymore. So I think someone has reviewed my challenge. Fresh. Okay, it seems like everybody's has reviewed it, and now I'm able to review other people's submissions. So that's cool. And then I'll just pay it forward and constantly review other people's submissions. Right now, nobody has submissions. So I move on to objects. So I'm going to continue through this whole document. It's all very interesting stuff. Then it even shows you how to hack. This is interesting. Play this game in it. Oh, wow. Oh no, I lost. It's hard. Yes, I am Cerny. Whoa. I need to add myself to the leaderboard, so let's hack this. Oh no. To view the network request, and since I didn't capture what just happened, I need to replay the game. Wow, that's a good one. "17 seconds." So now, capture this, we have to look closely. So add score, name Bernie Cerny's Banders, that's me. Score 17. So if I right click, copy, fetch, paste it in, give myself, this is a big number, negative 13409. And I'm gonna copy everything in case it doesn't. This didn't work. So this is by, okay, so I think this page has been truly hacked. Every score I put in is now that person. So how do we solve this problem? Okay, so so this page, when it was built, it wasn't secure. So what he did is, in his ad score, he added a piece of JavaScript so that it always adds him as winner. So to solve this problem, I need to run this from my terminal. It's too sneaky. So it's the URL. see it. So it still doesn't work. Hey, actually, I think it worked. I am now on the leaderboard. Okay, so moving on. So this person, I think he added a script that always made him the top user. So that is some genius hacking wins. Okay, so moving on. Now I'm at the challenges. And now I join the JS3 chat room so I can ask for help. Cool. So now I'm going to start JS3. Return array of values. Before I do that, I do git checkout master. And on my master branch, I don't have any JS2 folder, so I need to merge P1. And now you see there's a JS2 folder. So I brought all the code in P1 into my master branch. So now I'm gonna bring all the code in P2 here. And the reason why this shows up is because every time I merge, it's creating a new commit. So I can change this. Sony vendors is amazing. I can change the message, and if you look at the git log, the last commit is actually git merge Sony vendors is amazing. So the text show up because it gives you, whenever you merge, it gives you the opportunity to change the default commit message. That's why you see that. Okay. So git merge p3. Then if I look at JS2 folder, now all the problem solutions are here. Six, 7, 8, 9. Okay, cool. So if I look at JS2, all 11 problems are in here. And I'm ready to start problem 1. The issue with P1 right now is that I list up JS2. I only have one file, which is just a P1 file, the problem 1. But I need this to be updated with master. So to do that, I do a git merge master. So now if I ls p2 JS2, all my files are in. So now, in the previous challenge, I constantly have to make the JS3 folder over and over again. So to save myself from doing that, I go to master and I create a JS3 folder, and then I add it in here. Add a sample file. Now, when I go to P1 and I do a git merge master, so every time I do a git merge master for all of my problem branches from now on, I'll always have that JS3 folder, so I don't have to recreate this over and over. With that said, I can finally start. I'm going to start by creating one.test.js and then a okay, so one.test.js. So how do we do this problem? Given an array of keys and object, return a new array of values using the given array as keys to the object. So here, because 1, 2, 3 matched, it would give high. And then ABC matched, it would give world. That makes sense. So const values equal 1.js describe. Then I want to prevent describe my text editor yelling at me, so global describe expect go test should. So if my array is empty, then there's nothing to match. So should return the array if it's empty. So that's my first test, and my second test is should return empty array if object is empty. So the third one is should return empty array if there are no matches. So return correct values. I think these 4 tests should cover all of the cases. So let's start. Cons result equal values array name is first name surname expect result the array, and then should return empty array. So array has a key called first and object is empty, so it should also return empty. And get array value of last. This has a first name surname, should also be empty. It's good. I have last. And then maybe something that doesn't exist, like for first last, should have first name. Then I have hobby. The result should be vendors and surname. Cool. So I think these test cases should reflect yeah, the problem really well. So I think now it's time to solve the problem. Let's get this function that takes in a object. Export. Okay, now I have the function shape. I need to talk about how to solve this problem. So I have an array, and then I need to go through each element in the array, and then if the element exists in the object, then I push into a new array. And then since I'm going through the array and I'm constantly adding to it, I see this as an accumulator, so I need a reduce function. So I'm pretty much returning, so I'm reducing through the array, and anytime I find a key inside the object, I'll push the value into the accumulator and then continue. So this is as simple as returning a reduce. This takes an accumulator index, and then I start with an empty array. I actually don't really care. And if the object I need to check if the object has the property. So object is on start. So if the object has own property e, and later want to push value object at index e later. This is it. Let's see if it works. JS3. Nice, all the tests passed. Works. So git add JS3 solve 1 3 problem. All right, the races. Cool. So 2D array of objects. Okay, this is very similar to JS2, I believe. Let's check this out. JS2, the array generator. So this has an array of objects instead. So I think the test, I want to just make this look exactly like that. So the test I can copy over from JS2 problem 3. Git check out problem 2, sync with master, and I'm going to copy JS2's property test to JS3. So here, I'm creating a 2D empty array if row 0 has negative number. Then for this problem, solution 3.2 with that. I'm not gonna write this out in the test. It seems like so. So solution that. Okay, so my test seems to cover all of the cases. When it's array 2D of 3, 2, it would return an array that looks like this. So it's the array. Let's solve this problem. Let's create make 2D equals a function that's in a row and a column. Okay, so now that we have the function shape, let's talk about how to solve this. If I was to do this during an interview, I would tell the interviewer that first I will make sure that because this function is a little challenging, you have to keep track of what is the x and what is the y. So I'm going to tell them that, let's say I have a make1d function that takes in the number of columns and then a value. So let's say I have make1d of 3 and the value is hello. Then what it would return is an array of object where x is 0, y is whatever I put in. This is 1, this is 2. So tell the interviewer, hey, can I assume, I'm going to assume that I have this make 1D function. And then assuming I have that, I can solve this function really easily. And then when I'm done solving the main function, I'll solve this if you still want me to solve it. And then that way, it helps them realize that it helps the interviewers see that you're really good at breaking down complex problem into little problems. So then it just makes it look good and it also saves time. So let's check this out. To self make 2D, I need a variable to keep track of which row I'm on and the result, which is an array. And when the index hits the row.length, I just return the result. Otherwise, I push the result of make 1D into the result array and continue. So I equals 0, result is an empty. So if I is equal to result dot equal to row, that's when I stop, return result. Okay, and then now if it doesn't, then I want to do result dot push of how many rows do I want? How many columns do I want? So match the column and then the I value as the Y value. That's it. Push it in and I repeat one. So usually when the interviewers see that you can write code like this already and make 1D is so similar to this code, they would just say, hey, it's okay, you don't even have to make 1D, we can move on. That way, this problem takes a lot shorter time than it normally would take. So you can move on to a new problem and work on the new problem with the interviewer. So breaking down problems into smaller problem would only help you as an engineer and also doing an interview. So there have been cases where they told me not to solve this helper function because it would just be a waste of time but some actually wants me to solve it. So let's assume they want you to solve it. This takes in the number of columns and then now that I have the function shape written out, the way I would do is I would need an index to keep track of where in the array I'm in, and I need a result array. So then if I hits the column, that means I'm done, so I return result. Otherwise, I push an object into the result, and I continue. So I is equal to 0, result is an empty. And if I is equal to column, result push object, x as the I, and y as the value. I is 1 result. Okay, so just JS3. Let's see if it passes the test. Fortunately, it didn't. The reason why it didn't is because it ran forever 1D. Why did this function go on forever? Result.length column passing this value. So I don't know if make1d is really causing the problem. So let's say I push in hello and I run the test. Oh, I think we didn't take care of the if row was smaller than or smaller than 0. or column is smaller than 0, just need to return the array. I think this is what we're missing. Okay, yeah, that was what we're missing. We didn't test for invalid inputs. So now this worked at JS3 solves 2, 3, submit to JS3 2. All right. We got to problem 2. I think we're about at our 2-hour mark. I'll continue tomorrow. Thank you everyone who tuned in. See you guys tomorrow at around the same time. Bye bye.